Hi everyone, and good afternoon, I guess, for those of you in Hong Kong time. And welcome to Kela's webinar series. My name is Irina Nestorovsky. I'm the Chief Research Officer here at Kela. And today's webinar will be discussing our research into this year's trends in ransomware attacks and network accesses as seen in the various cybercrime sources that we monitor here at Kela. I will be happy to answer any questions in the end of the session. So if you have them during the time I present, feel free to write them down and ask them later. I'm trying to switch the slides. So let's start with a bit of a background. So we at Kela monitor the cybercrime ecosystem, monitoring and researching. And the cybercrime ecosystem is comprised of sellers and buyers, just as your usual financial ecosystem. You can find there anything from databases to database of personal information, to malware, to tools that can be used to breach software and networks, and just your usual credit card related fraud. And there I mention is essentially online sources. Those are closed access, dedicated marketplace and forums. Those are specific instant messaging groups. Those are even clear web websites and social media. The existence of those tools widely and based on demand and offer means that a single threat actor no longer have to conduct the whole attack against an organization from start to end. They can just go into any of those sources in the cybercrime ecosystem and purchase relevant tools, credentials, and initial access online. They then can further use it or abuse it for further advancing an attack. So they don't actually need to know how to hack into one organization. They can just buy credentials for access. It is therefore very crucial to monitor an organization's and its employees' exposure in those cybercrime sources to make sure that any compromise that discussed in those sources is accounted for and mitigated before it becomes an actual cyber attack. As you know, in recent years, one of the most talked about threats to organizations has been ransomware attacks, especially since in the last couple of years, ransomware operators have also taken up a specific tactic against organizations that is aimed at making them pay. So what they do is they publish their victims' names online in what we call blogs of ransomware operators, and that is made to name and shame essentially those victims in the hopes that they will pay after being publicly exposed. This fact is, of course, bad for companies, but it is helpful for cybersecurity defenders and researchers to analyze those tactics, those attacks, victims, and of course the ransomware groups. And this is, of course, what we will discuss in this presentation, but also an interesting trend that we're seeing, and of course it's not a secret, that sometimes ransomware attacks originate from an initial access vector that is also sold in those cybercrime sources. Those are termed network access. They're sold by actors called initial access brokers, and we will also discuss how we can actually connect the two items together. So just in a couple of words, where does Kela fit in all this world? Of course, we're not part of it, but we are definitely monitoring and researching it. Using our proprietary technology through our cybercrime intelligence platform, we actually automatically collect data from hundreds of cybercrime underground sources, such as the ones I previously mentioned. We ingest everything into our database and automatically disseminate relevant intelligence to our clients in a readable, understandable form. We also provide context to threats wherever needed and conduct relevant research in our cyber intelligence center. And this research that I'm presenting today is, of course, part of that. All of this actually allows our clients to always be in the know regarding threats posed to them from those cybercrime underground sources, about their attack surface, about anything discussed about them. So let's start with actually discussing the findings from the research that we did concerning trends in the first quarter of 2022 when it comes to ransomware attacks and network accesses. So to start with, how did we find the information, or how did we analyze information? So we essentially analyzed the data that we obtained from ransomware gangs blogs, data leak sites, threat actor negotiation portals, and media reports in the first quarter of 2022. However, it is always important to remember when it comes to ransomware discussions that the number of victims that we recorded does not represent, of course, the absolute number of victims worldwide. Some companies actually pay the ransom, they do not make it to those blogs. Some companies are attacked by strains of ransomware that do not operate such blogs. And of course, you have your individual infections that don't make it anywhere. So obviously the number of actual victims of ransomware worldwide is much, much higher. And of course, it's not always possible to identify some victims through ransomware negotiation portals. So still, you can see here the numbers, even before I go over them, that they're pretty much high. If we talk only about 3 months in the beginning of 2022. And essentially, you can see the observations, the qualitative, the quantitative ones from our research. We compared first quarter of 2022 to the last quarter of 2021. Based on our observations, we could actually see that the total number of victims has dropped by, we can say almost 50%, but 40%, that's the actual number. And we could see that within the first quarter, the number of victims has grown. So if January was only at 150 victims, March already saw over 300. When it comes down to discussing which sectors were most targeted by ransomware operators that we monitor, we could see that the top 3 were companies from the manufacturing and industrial products sector. We could see them being featured from companies in professional services. So it's your law firms or any kind of services that are provided to other companies or people. And the technology sector was also in the top 3 attacked by ransomware in first quarter of 2022. An interesting part here about healthcare organizations. So we have seen in the past 2 years, especially in light of COVID, that some ransomware operators claim to not target healthcare organizations. So they are out of the equation. Nevertheless, obviously, there were enough of those that did target those, and the result is for almost 40 healthcare organizations that fell victim in the first quarter of 2022. When we come to discussing the top countries where such ransomware attacks occurred, that's actually not a big surprise for us, having followed those attackers for the past 3 years very closely. We can see the top targeted country is still the United States, with 40% of the attacks being perpetrated against companies located in the States, and there is a perfectly good explanation for that. The attackers think that US companies have more money to pay, and they actually pay up, followed by the UK, Italy, Germany, and Canada. All of which are, of course, Western civilization countries that also can pay up, probably. And for those of you familiar with a bit of the names of ransomware strains, so we looked, of course, at who was the most popular, or let's say prolific attacker, and we could see that in the first quarter of 2022, Lockbit was the most active gang, as we call them, in attacking, followed by Conti, which we will discuss a bit later, AlphaV, Hive, Karakurt, and a lot of others, but combined together, they still don't make up the most of the attackers. And if we have to go into specific, even more details about the ransomware groups, we could actually see that compared to last year, we could see that Lockbit has replaced Conti as the most active gang. And for those who are familiar with the Conti drama, and again, we will discuss it a bit later. We could see that the number of attacks launched by Conti dropped in January, but later increased. And if you go back to some other observations in terms of more general specifications of the victims, then we could see that actually the finance sector is now one of the top 5 targeted sectors, simply because, so previously we presented the top 3, but the finance sector, as opposed to last year, has actually climbed into the top 5, with 40% of the attacks claimed by Logbit. In terms of other observations that we had from the attacks, we saw that some of the ransomware gangs has also launched a new intimidating method, we can call it, where they would just publish a victim without its name. They would post some identifying information, or even just a new victim coming up, publication of information in 2 days. We could assume that they send this website to the victim and showing, like, if you don't pay, in 2 days, your actual name will be here. And that's how they try to intimidate them even more. And final observation, not final, but one of those we want to present is, as we saw in the previous year, we also saw duplication of victims between ransomware gangs. So this partially can be explained by either cooperation between gangs or actual usage of different attack vectors to attack the same victim. So, for example, on January 15, we saw that a US-based auto dealer was claimed to be compromised by Conti. And on March, so 2 months later, in March, the company was actually disclosed as a victim of AlphaV. So those are 2 companies that claimed the same victim. And another example, in April, the Avos Locker team has published the same company on its website. So this points either to a cooperation or a coincidence, but either way, a very interesting observation on our end. And since we're presenting in Hong Kong time, and we want to kind of to see a specific focus on victims from the Asia geography, we actually took a look at which ransomware gangs attacked companies in the area. And you can actually see, first of all, here you can see the different names of the perpetrators, and the colors represent the different countries or locations. So you can actually see that there were quite a lot attacks, specifically in Hong Kong region, led by the Logbit gang. And Logbit also followed with kind of most of Singapore victims. So overall, you could see that the Asian geography was also not shy of victims in this area. And of course, I hope that none of your companies were there. Okay, now let's zoom into Conti. I did promise it a couple of moments ago. So Conti, I think, deserves a special attention, especially since they were top attackers last year and in varying times over the past 2 years. So if we look at everything that happened to them, actually even more than in Q1. So first thing that we observed is actually the amount of victims they declared has decreased in January as opposed to last year. And then what happened, all of you know, Russia launched a war against Ukraine. And when that happened, Conti actually announced on their website that they support the Russian government and they actually would act to attack infrastructure of anyone targeting Russia's infrastructure. So they took a side, which happens. But the result of that, and I'm sure at least some of you have heard of this, is that a couple of days later, a person who's claimed to be a Ukrainian researcher, a Ukrainian cybersecurity researcher, who actually had access to Conti's infrastructure, and he was seeing all of their correspondences over the years. He decided to retaliate and leak the entire conversations from the past year and a half from the organization. Kela has also ingested this information, and we were able to kind of find previously undisclosed victims, and you could actually have a good glimpse into how these attackers corresponded with each other and how they planned stuff, etc. But obviously this leakage of information raised question on how will they continue to operate, how will this affect them, and so on. And really we saw that in March, so soon after this publication, they went quiet for 3 days, but then they started publishing again, and the number of victims they published was actually double in March as opposed to February. And these numbers combined, we could see that together with another group that is associated with them, Caracord, Conti were the second most active group still in the first quarter of 2022. What is not in this slide, but I will continue talking about them because really it's an interesting topic. So this was not actually the end, of course, of Conti's deed. In May 2022, researchers claimed that Conti have shut down their operation with their internal infrastructure taken offline. However, we at Kela still saw their data leak blog and one of the negotiation sites still active. However, when was it? In June, it actually was shut down finally. The question is what happened to all the people who were part of the Conti operation. So researchers suspected that the members are migrating, or they started creating smaller ransomware operations such as Hello Kitty, Avos Locker, Hive, AlphaV, Blackbyte, and others. And actually we saw that between those times of claims to shut the infrastructure down and the website going down, there were actually no new victims from May, with one exception. There was, maybe some of you saw this, there was quite a heavy targeting of the Costa Rica government, and that information was also actually shared later by other threat actors on Hive's data leak site and others. So really, the Conti story as Conti maybe is over, but their operation definitely continues. And recently researchers found out that the Conti operators were actually wanted to create smaller ransomware groups, and they did collaborate with AlphaV, Avos Locker, Hive, and Hello Kitty Gang. So all of those names did cooperate together. And I guess we will still see more of those operations, even not if under Conti's name. Now I want to discuss another threat actor that you've all probably heard about, and that is the Lapsus group. So Lapsus are not actually a ransomware group, but while we observe victims of data leaks, data breaches, the ones that are actually claimed by specific groups, Lapsus was definitely one of them, and we could see that they were really active, we can say it, in Q1, and they actually claimed very high profile targets, such as NVIDIA, LG Electronics, Samsung, Okta, T-Mobile. The actual attacks were very specific. So for example, in Okta's case, as some of you probably heard, it was actually not an attack against Okta, but a third party, so a contractor account that was compromised. And so they were able to later gain access to some of his Okta platforms. And other companies, it's also kind of questionable on the amount of damage that was actually done, but still they made a lot of noise. And the funny part is actually that the authorities arrested 2 teenagers and charged them with those data breaches. And observing actual conversation on cybercrime underground forums, we could see that people are actually making kind of fun of them, saying that they're kind of clowns, they're underqualified, and they made some critical mistakes. But of course, this is something that comes after a bit of analysis. The first thing you see is, oh my God, NVIDIA got breached. Wow, LG Electronics suffered the data breach, etc. And you have to actually deep dive into it and understand what actually happened. And that's what we're doing. And actually, despite the arrests, Lapsus actually reappeared in May. And why we're saying this, because we saw a user who was previously associated with Lapsus on one of the forums. He claimed to have in possession NVIDIA's hardware and firmware folders, that is the exact quotation of this person, and that he was ready to sell them. The actor is kind of announcing more information. They try to researchers try to connect him with other actors, and we're definitely also still researching, but also we might see more of Lapsus or their copycats or whoever. So stay tuned for our observations. And this part of the ransomware trends concludes the observations that we had. And now I want to go into our observations of the network accesses trends or network access sales trends that we observed, and of course later connect the two. So Kela continuously and automatically monitors network access listings on major cybercrime forums. We also privately communicate with threat actors to receive exclusive offers and insights. And just to make sure we're all aligned, initial network access is usually provided as a set of credentials to a company's network perimeter through different access tools such as VPNs, remote control protocols, and others. And the actors selling those credentials, those accesses, are termed by Kela as initial access brokers. And the prices can be as little as actually $100 or $200, $300 for a user privileged access to a company's network, and they can be larger in the thousands of dollars in case the actor thinks he actually has advanced privileges to sell, if a company is big enough. And I will of course also discuss those criteria later. So the same way we tracked ransomware actors and their victims, we also track the offers to sell network accesses to make sure we're on top of everything and to make sure that we can derive conclusions and we can actually see what's been changed since the last time we reviewed this information actively, of course, or in means of research. So what we saw is actually in the first quarter of 2022, we traced over 521 offers to sell access to different companies, with the cumulative requested price being over $1 million. Now, the reason for people to actually sell this information and not use this on their own connects us to, I think, the first slide, where we said that you don't have to actually commit the hack on your own. You can actually just buy it online. The same way the people who sell it probably are not interested to pursuing it on their own, but they still want to monetize the information they got, and this is why they sell it. From those offers that we observed, we also saw that at least 11% were publicly reported as sold by those threat actors. Publicly reported meaning that in the same cybercrime forum, the actor actually wrote after offering an access for sale that's sold. Sometimes we're also able to track who they were sold to based on the correspondences that are visible to us. And of course, it is possible that some of those are sold in private, and we cannot know whether they were sold or not. From those observations on accesses what actually reported as sold, we saw that the average time for the accesses to be sold is actually less than 2 days. 1.75 is a very interesting number, but essentially less than 2 days to sell a network access, which is kind of fast, I would think. And of course, we wanted to understand what is most common type of access that is offered, that people are interested in. And those are, unsurprisingly, remote desktop protocol connections and VPN connections that enables you to actually look as if you're logging into a company as an employee. Threat actors also frequently mentioned different VPN products from companies such as Citrix, Fortinet, and Palo Alto, which are, of course, the leaders in the field. So it's not surprising that they mentioned them. But those were kind of the second most preferred accesses. So you can see here on the right, I'm not sure, yeah, you can see them. Some of them are in Russian, but some of them are actually in English. You can see how those offers actually look, and I will explain each of them a bit later. But if we're still talking about observations and numbers, so at least 116 actors were seen engaged in those kind of activities. And that's actually an increase of what we saw in the number of active actors in the last quarter of 2021, an increase of about 15%. And in this quarter, each of the top 3 initial access brokers, meaning the people who sold or offered to sell the most accesses, they each one offered for sale more than 30 accesses. So think about it. Actors who achieve access to 30 organizations, that is quite a lot. And we're talking only about the top 3. You could have, of course, the actor that offers 2, 3, 4 accesses and makes his enough money for that month. So if we talk about top 3 initial access brokers, just to kind of discuss some of the names that we're seeing. So on the top right, you can actually see an offer from an actor called Novelli. So this actor has been active on CyberConform since 2019. So he's quite a veteran in this field, and he offers dozens of network accesses every month. So think about the work that he does. And he usually sells RDP access to different companies as part of one offer for a fixed price. That is as opposed to a bulk of accesses or an auction pricing. So you can see here on top in the title, it actually says the description of the company. So you have RDP access in Turkey to a company with a revenue of $27 million. And we will touch a bit upon how they actually describe those companies if it's still not clear from here. So essentially, this guy is offering access here actually in an auction, saying that the first price for this RDP access will be $500, and the buyout price, if you really, really want this access, for $800. So as I mentioned in the beginning, it's not a very pricey offer. So you can start with that and proliferate into a whole attack if you know what you're doing. The second screenshot is actually from an actor that we are quite familiar with. Their name is Pumped Kicks, but they also are active under the moniker Montana, with a bit of like hacker use of the letter 4 instead of A. So this actor usually offers information from SQL vulnerabilities, SQLI vulnerable websites. But he also started, as you can see in this screenshot in the middle, selling a shell on network access in a subdomain of a specific company. And he usually actually sells them for really less than $500. It can be $300, $200. He just wants the money. So we actually observe him rising to top 3 in the offers that he's offering, and that's kind of interesting. And the last example on the lower part of the slide is of the new threat actor who has been active since March 2022. But since he's in top 3, we can see that he started heavy, and he claims that most of his accesses belong to Australia and US-based companies. So in this case, you can see some words, actually one word in English or 2 words in English, but actually he says that he sells access to an IT network to a company of IT with 500 million Citrix RDP. A lot of words that do not necessarily connect to each other, but it is possible that he is selling several accesses, etc. And he also says that this company is located in India. So this really, so you can see how those offers look, and that you kind of have to walk your way through understanding what those actors are actually offering. And if we're talking a bit about statistics, so top 5 targeted countries, here as well included United States, UK, Brazil, Canada, and India. Almost half of all the accesses for sale targeted these 5 geographies, essentially they were sold. And with the US being most targeted, we also identified the growing interest in the States by this actor we mentioned earlier, Pumped Kicks. And just to make it kind of interesting, Brazil and India usually are not the most popular choice by attackers, but in Q1, those countries actually made it to the top. And for example, Brazil was mainly targeted by Novelli, the actor that I first presented in the last slide. If we're talking about the top industries that the attackers that sell network accesses are looking at, we saw that the most targeted industries have similar patterns to those attacked by ransomware gangs. However, just as I mentioned that healthcare organizations are sometimes off limits for some ransomware gangs, similarly, educational institutes are also part of that. But in the case of initial access brokers, they were actually happy to offer those. And it is possible that educational institutions, they could be targets for breaching a network, but they still will not be as popular by ransomware attackers, which is perfectly fine. You can do still other things with an access to a network, not necessarily a ransomware attack. So just also to show some big examples of network accesses, I will go over briefly over some big ones from top to bottom. So for example, on the top offer, you actually have access to an automotive manufacturer in the States, to what is described as tier 1 car manufacturer with $30 billion in revenue. The actor claimed the access enables logging into a user privilege machine with without two-factor authentication, which is a very important part for network defenders, what not to do. And he actually offered this access for not $500, but actually $15,000. So that's kind of a presumptuous offer. The next one from February 1st, offered by actor in the Matrix. He was seen selling access to US-based medical services company with over $500 million in revenue. Also for $15,000. I don't know what's this magic number, but it is something that he offered. And this auction was actually closed, meaning it was sold on February 3rd, so 2 days after it was offered. And the last example is actually a threat actor, Big Shady, who was seen selling access to a UK-based fintech company with $50 million in revenue. He claimed that the access is provided through an AWS account and grants administrator permissions. And this access was offered for sale for $10,000. So while I did say that many of those accesses are actually cheap ones, those actually demonstrate that some are more ambitious. And now we get to the interesting part, in my opinion. So we saw network accesses being sold. We know that ransomware operations exist, and we see some hints to the fact that those can be connected. But how do we connect one to the other, and what is the actual challenge here? So first of all, you could see in those posts that I just showed, you couldn't actually see the name of the victim company. So this is how those guys operate to avoid detection, to avoid burning their access. They just don't name the company usually, if they're knowledgeable enough. So what they will do, they will list the properties of a compromised company, also just as you saw, revenue, size, industry description. And the fun part is many of the access brokers, they're actually using known sales leads platforms to find this information. Known sales leads platforms such as ZoomInfo, Bloomberg, Hoover's, and some others, but ZoomInfo really leads this list. So once we realize that, we also realize that we can track down those victims. And those metrics actually help us to identify almost 10% of initial access brokers' victims with medium and high levels of confidence. Sometimes it's really the actual numbers written in ZoomInfo, and then we can identify the victim. And God forbid, if it's our client, we can also, of course, notify them and help them to mitigate this risk. So just an example of how it looks, and those are screenshots from our threat research platform. So for example, the top screenshot is our documentation of the threat actor white album selling access to a company from a utility sector in Vietnam with $257 million in revenue. And based on this information, we were able to identify the victim company. You can see it on the right here, the insight part. And actually, on February 6th, which is a month, less than a month later, we could see that the ransomware Blackbyte has announced that they attacked this company. So while we do not have a confirmation from the company to say that, yes, this white album was the guy, because they obviously don't know as well, we have seen enough of those examples to be able to say that, yes, this is a possible vector of attack, and this is how we connect them. So we have a network access. We know that this could easily, or not easily, but with enough work, lead to a ransomware event. And this is what happens. This is how we identify them. We actually saw Blackbyte buying access from initial access brokers before. And in February 22, the FBI issued a warning regarding this group with indicators of compromise. So this is definitely a group that has been involved in buying initial access from these forums. The other example that you can see here on the screen is a threat actor named VCC Expert. He was seen selling access to a US-based IT company. Also, based on all of the description he provided, sometimes it includes the number of employees, etc. We also, our analysts, identified this victim company, and we saw that actually a week later it was compromised or claimed compromised by the Alpha V operator. So this time frame is actually a very close one, but it is possible that an access was gained through other means from initial access that they gained on their own. But still, this coincidence, as we can call it, really shows us how it can happen. And we don't even have to speculate. So what you see in this slide is actually on the below side of the screenshot. You can actually see a representative of the Avaslocker ransomware actually paying attention and being interested actively in a network access sold by a separate threat actor. Here you can see, because in Russian, but the actor Blackjack is selling access to a Germany-based company with 23 billion in revenue in auction. And you can see that the Avos Lottery representative actually asks for more details to do that. So it really isn't about speculation on our end. This actually happens. And this actually means that while there are a lot of precursors for a ransomware attack, and it can happen really with different types of compromises, it is very crucial to monitor those listings to make sure that your organization is not mentioned there. And it's for us, it's really super interesting. So in the first quarter of 2022, if we are talking about actual observations, we saw at least 3 ransomware gangs buying access from initial access brokers. So you saw the Blackbyte gang, but also Quantum and AlphaV, which we saw actually paying interest into different organizations to whom access is sold. And this is actually a nice illustration of our observations over the last 2 years from multiple network accesses that we identified as related to ransomware attacks and the actual time that it takes to compromise them. So you can see that from listing being listed for sale, so an actual network access, it takes about 1 to 3 days to actually sell it. From there, from the access being sold to compromising to deploying ransomware, and all of this process taking about a month. And while this was not included in this presentation, because we're only talking here about the first quarter, we could actually see this happen in other cases where it was really about a month or a bit later, a bit more, from an access being sold to a company and it actually being claimed as a ransomware victim. So to summarize, and I have talked enough, I think, we could see that initial access brokers offers continue to be in demand in first quarter. Some of them were exploited by ransomware gangs, and you of course saw that ransomware gangs are not stopping on their way to actually attack companies and have the ransom money into their pockets. By monitoring those attacks, as we already discussed, the defenders organizations, hopefully those are you can stay ahead of the cyber criminals, so you can prevent potential ransomware attacks. And if you're seeing the slide, hopefully you are, feel free to have a tryout at our platforms. We will be able to share this QR code later as well, I believe. And this is where I stop talking for myself, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And thank you. Okay, so I do have some items here. First one is, what is your forecast for the rest of 2022? So unfortunately, as we see, the ransomware gangs and network accesses do not stop appearing. Each month there are new ransomware blogs that are created. They can be even rewritings of similar ransomware, but the operators are probably different. So unfortunately, we do not see this stopping even after all of the arrests or kind of attempts at arrests that were made last year by US authorities. And of course, also the Russia-Ukraine conflict will probably produce more threats. So unfortunately, this will continue. So you even more have to be sure that you monitor all those risks. And Yes, so another question we have here, if you could have access to the recorded presentation, I believe that a presentation will be sent to the participants, and thank you for thank you for the compliment. Another question that we have here is, of course, companies have to and already had shifted to more online services and working from home, and how can you protect yourself? So unfortunately, what we saw is really with work from home that companies were not prepared enough to actually start sharing the network with everyone who needed access to it, and that actually led to some attacks that people are not using their VPNs accordingly, and it's not really an easy process. So while you cannot actually stop going online, etc., it is important that specific controls are put in place, that every connection is accounted for, and that essentially, of course, you also have the part of the monitoring included in that. So, and of course, make sure you patch all of the platforms that you're using, and that you have a proper controls in place for that as well. Another question is, have any of the customers managed to prevent an attack by using this intelligence and KLS platform? So actually, we were able to alert companies early to a network access that was being sold. We have seen clients actually identifying an illicit access, and hopefully this helped them prevent an actual ransomware attack, or we talk about ransomware attack as being the worst, but of course there are other things that you can do. But definitely the identification of those accesses is really important, etc. Okay. Do you think language barrier affects the amount of victims in APAC? So we did see some actors describing victims in APAC in terms of, I think it's Japan, I think it's something, so they're not always sure how they do that. But eventually, I think with APAC countries and companies in APAC also being more and more online, I think this will not continue to affect as much. So the only thing that will matter is really the money. And they will find the people to talk to that actually speak English, and they will try to extort them. So while definitely the US is easier, we don't think that APAC countries should kind of be very nobody knows our language, so we're not at risk. This is really not the case. And thank you for that question. Any more questions I would like to answer? Okay, just a second. And also another question on languages, and that's actually a good one. So you saw the screenshots I provided, and many of them are in Russian. The question is, like, how can you or will you get value if you don't speak Russian from KLS technology? So that's actually a great question. And while for me it's very easy to to not to avoid that, but to actually read the original posts. Obviously, most of our clients, actually none of our clients, are Russian speaking, and we want the clients to be able to know what threats they're facing with. So first of all, our technology provides automatic translation option to any of the posts. Secondly, if a client requests more context for the information they get, they can reach out to Kela and ask for the question. But technology-wise, what we do is that we also provide summaries of the most interesting posts in English, and from there you can also, of course, use any translation you like. So we try to give the intelligence in an accessible way way for you to read the intelligence, to get it. And of course, again, the most basic part, you can just automatically translate the raw intelligence, etc. So also, thank you for that question. And let me just also, one of the questions, so regarding this slide, the previous one, is actually the QR code I mentioned that we encourage you to try out our platforms. So what we offer here is a 2-week trial without communicating with any kind of sales engineer or salesperson, unless you want it. You can actually have immediate and direct access to our data lake, and you can actually see and immediately research the threats to your organization by actually entering the keywords related to you. You can see immediately relevant results from our data lake, whether email addresses of your organization were exposed, or any of your employee was infected with the information stealing malware and their credentials are now being sold. And overall, of course, what threat actors are talking about in general. So if that's something that's interesting to you, and hopefully it is, really feel free either to scan this QR code or go to our website and actually access the request from there. Okay, and another question, how far back does your data lake go? That's a great question. So once Kela starts to monitor a specific source, we go as far back as that source goes back. So for example, we have known cybercrime forums in Russian who started being operating from 2004, some of them 2001, so that's about 20 years now of information. Of course, for newer sources, we're committed to the number of years they exist, but really this depth of information, that depth of data, actually enables us and our clients to research threats far back, research threat actors, to see, the context, to see which activities were happening earlier, and to actually perform this tracing of threat actors 5 years, 10 years back, to see what they were doing or what kind of threats were posed back then. So thank you for that question as well. Okay, I think we'll give half a minute for any other questions if you'd like, and if not, then I will thank you for being here with me this afternoon, and of course looking forward to see you all try out our product. Thank you, Carlos. Okay. Of course, if you had any, you can also reach out to us if you do remember any questions later. And looking forward to see you in our future webinars. And thank you.